Hi everyone out there in internet land, it's Myles Astor returning again for another review for AVShowrooms.com. This time we're going to be doing a review of the Audia Flight Strumento No. 4 solid state amplifier. Now I know Audia Flight's not a well-known name here on the American shores, but this Italian company's been in business for now close to 20 years. And again, my first introduction to this amplifier came at last year's New York Audio Show, where the importer Paul Manos had it driving the Verity Parcel Anniversary speakers. And again, it was a really great sound, and it impressed me a whole lot. I think I gave it one of my top sounds at the New York Audio Show last year. So again, after I finished doing the Magico review last time for Peter, we were brainstorming and going like, okay, what product should we cover next? We went through a lot of worthy products, and all of a sudden we kind of like both had the same thought. What about the Audia Flight amplifier? And I said, yeah, that sounded really great. And Peter's like, yeah, it sounded really great to me, so let's see what we can do, make it happen. And sure enough, you know, we managed to make it happen, and I think everyone out there is going to be really impressed by the sound of this amplifier. And again, it's a great amplifier, found it really worked well with the Magicos. Now, it's not a cheap amplifier. You're going to find this stereo amp, and it's a pretty heavy one at that. It weighs about 225 pounds, so moving it around is going to be definitely a 2 or 3 person job, especially comes in a nice big wooden crate, so add another 50 pounds to that. So you definitely need some real behemoths to move this amplifier. But it's priced at $27,500 for the stereo amp, and if you actually want a little more power and you want a little more oomph and maybe just a slightly better sound, they actually do make a monoblock version of this amp that runs $65,000. So it's kind of interesting. This is one of a few Italian products that's been running through the house recently. We had this amplifier, we had the speaker cables that we just reviewed for positive feedback, the Viero, and we had some tapes come in from a couple of companies in Italy. So I almost feel like Ken Kessler should be doing this review. Certainly he probably could have helped a little bit with the translation of the information. That was a little bit difficult. But the company was founded back in 1996 in Italy by Massimino Marzi and Andrea Nardini, and it's basically all assembled, fabricated, and built in Italy. And according to the designers, this is really the sum of their lifelong professional experience. And basically, the company's philosophy can be summed up in 2 sentences. Basically, that no component in the audio chain should be changing the signal. And number 2 is maintain the appropriate speed in the amplifier so it doesn't introduce what they call low transient instabilities, e.g. their non-current limiting design. And when you look at the design considerations and look beyond the design considerations, being Italian, of course, they always want to look at the artistic side, and they also believe that their amp, besides measuring well and performing well, should also have real heart and feeling. In other words, to them as Italians, they meant art was a way to convey the emotions, and the handicrafts are the ability to create the objects. And essentially, this amplifier is the embodiment of their philosophy. So essentially, you know, we all know out there a lot of new amplifiers are being built in the solid state world that are wide bandwidth, and this is kind of another addition to that wide bandwidth solid state amp category, and this amp will extend out to about 1 megahertz. And they went to great lengths. We know there are some problems associated with these wide bandwidth solid state amplifiers, and they went to great lengths to produce a really stable amp. Now, if there's one thing that's probably the secret to their amplifiers, it's basically their use of current rather than voltage feedback. And that's kind of their unique solution to solid state amp sounds. And by doing that, they found that this allowed their amps to interface much better with speakers, especially reactive speaker loads, and to respond to it much more quickly. As we know, that's really not a trivial point, because a lot of today's new solid state amplifiers show some pretty wild reactive curves. You know, you look at their phase angles, their impedance curves, and some of them are pretty low. And so it's really important that these amplifiers nowadays be able to maintain their stability into these widely varying loads. And just a little bit about the amplifier, just to let you know, it's a Class AB design, runs about 20 watts into Class A. It's rated at 200 watts into 8 ohms, and it doubles down to 800 watts into 2 ohms. And this does run hot. Don't make any mistake about this. If you think that, hey, this is going to be my summer amp when I put my tube amps away, that's not going to be the amp for you, okay? This amp runs warm. If you have cats, they're definitely going to love this amplifier. Frequency response runs from about 0.3 hertz up to 1 megahertz. Its distortion, total harmonic distortion, is 0.03%. Low signal to noise ratio, 100 dB, and it has a really high damping factor of 1,000. But as I said before, most of all, moving this baby around is not going to be easy. And kind of once you plant it in place, you better make sure that's the spot it's going to stay, because you're not going to want to move it again. Okay, so before we talk about the sound of the Strumento 4, I thought it's kind of really interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about the craftsmanship when you look at this. And craftsmanship is something that's really important, I think, especially when you're talking about a piece of equipment that's going to run $27,000, that it should really be built well. And that's something that Dave Wilson kind of pounded into my head 15 years ago when I went out to his factory, and he talked about even how speakers are put together. You shouldn't see seams, you shouldn't see this, you shouldn't see that. And I think that's what you really see in terms of the craftsmanship when you look at this amplifier. First of all, it's milled out of a solid billet piece of aluminum, and then it's all CNC machined. And when you actually can look at it, the front panel is actually made out of 3 pieces of aluminum that are machined. They're test fitted in the factory, seeing that they can match together. Each of them is numbered by hand. They're shipped to the factory, and then they're sent out for shot peening, and then each of the pieces is anodized. And then it comes back and it's all hand assembled. So there's a lot of labor that goes into it, but when you look at it, you can barely see any seams in this amplifier. Everything just fits together like a glove. And even the on-off button on the very front of the amp, if you look at it, there's an hour of labor that just goes into that, because it's all hand assembled and custom fitted to the amp. So it's really a beautiful piece. Everything's laid out well on the back. When you look at the back of the amp, the binding posts are set apart, the input jacks are set in there. They're really easy to get to, so there's not one running into the other like in some of the old amp products where you couldn't put the 2 speaker cables there because a binding posts were next to each other. So again, the layout on the back of the amp is really well thought out. And the amp runs, it's a balanced amp, but you could run it as single-ended or balanced by just throwing a switch on there. Anyway, just as far as the design of the amp goes, as I said, it's fully balanced design like you would expect in a product of this caliber. It's got a huge power supply, uses 3 kVA audio double shielded transformer, 200,000 microfarads of capacitance there in the power supply. And again, it doesn't use any fuses in the circuit path. And what it does is it has a special design protection board in there that really monitors in real time what's going on in the circuit. And then each of the gain stages, the input and gain stages, they use 2 fully shielded 100 volt amp audio transformers, again with another 42,000 microfarads of capacitance. So again, these stabilized power supplies really contribute to what you hear in the amplifier's low noise floor, and as they refer to, less contamination of the audio signal. When you go to the output stage, basically they use 24 Motorola transistors to deliver a peak of 160 amps or 240 amps in short-term peak delivery. And again, because it is ultra-high bandwidth, they use 2 ultra-fast recovery diodes to protect the output stage. And so basically that has to do with a lot of the circuit design. One other comment I had on it is I do wish I had a little better owner's manual with it, because it really isn't a whole lot about operating it. And in fact, when I got the amplifier, I had to call up the importer to figure out how to turn it on, because there's actually a big turn on switch in the very back that turns on the power for the amp, and then there's another switch on the front. So you got to turn the one on, you leave that on all the time, and then you either put it into a pause mode or active mode by depressing the front switch. And again, the front switch also tells you if there's a fault that goes on. Like I had 2 instances, one where I had a pop come through the system and it shut the amp down, and it puts out a little number on the front that tells you, like, number 7, what happened. You just shut the amp off, start it up, and you're back in business. So that was a good test of the protection circuitry, that it actually does work as it's intended. And along with the amp, we also got for review, and was supplied by Paul Manos, also 2 products that he's bringing in. The amp is sitting on some custom-made hi-fi racks from the UK. And this one's specially made for the Strumento. It's made out of oak and it runs $260. And again, Paul also supplied a special power cord 20 amp capacity from Unity Audio out in California. And again, this 8-foot, about 2-meter version of the power cord runs about $1,760. So that's kind of the long and short of the amplifier as it's set up in the system today. So what I'd like to do next is we're going to go to the listening session, and we're going to play a few tapes. We're going to play a couple of LPs for everyone so you can kind of hear the system as a whole. And then what we'll do is then after that go to a little bit of discussion about what I feel the strengths and whatever I think could be a little bit better where it falls maybe just a little short of ultimate in terms of its sonic presentation.